Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. In today's video, I wanted to return to something I started a long time ago, which was going through all the different classes and just talking about my favorite selections of spells for each class. We did clerics, we did artificers, and of course we did warlocks. And that was it. So I figured today, let's take a look at bards. I think bards are a very interesting class in the sense that you have a lot of the benefits that some of the other casters have. You have ritual casting, you've got a pretty good spell selection, and you have a wide variety of spells that you can choose from like disable spells, buff spells, debuff spells, healing spells. You can do quite a bit. But one thing bards can't do is just pick it all. You have a very limited number of spells known. This is something we talk about with sorcerers a lot. But bards suffer from the same issue, and for some reason it's rarely mentioned. In fact, I would say that bards have it a lot worse than sorcerers, because at least with a sorcerer, you've got things like meta magic to get more out of your spells that you do know. You can also do things like convert spell slots back into sorcery points or sorcery points into spell slots. So even though you are still rather limited in the spells that you have available, you get so much more mileage out of them. Bards don't have that. They do have ritual spellcasting though, which at least is nice. But in general, I find that I really kind of want to pick a role for my bard. If I try to beat everything all at the same time, you just get stretched very, very thin, and you end up being, you end up being a bard. You end up being a jack of all trades and a master of none, which is, a great ability, but not what you want as a spellcaster. So I figured I'd go over my, this is going to be part one. We're going to look at cantrips and then first through third level spells. And we'll just go over some of my picks and some of the ones that I think are best avoided. And, I'll just kind of give my thoughts or reasoning on them if I think it warrants it. Some of them are pretty obvious, I think, like, whatever. So anyways, let's just start things out with our cantrips. Personally, I really like Minor Illusion. I think that it's a spell, though, that really varies depending on the dungeon master you have, as well as your creativity. If you aren't comfortable using illusion spells, that's okay. I would just probably avoid them altogether in that case. But if you do like illusion spells, Minor Illusion is a very nice spell. I like Mage Hand. I just find it useful. It's not particularly powerful or anything like that, but, it's basically limited telekinesis. It's pretty useful. Vicious Mockery. This is like kind of a defining bard cantrip, really. It's very, very strong at low levels, even though the damage is weak throughout. But the effect is quite nice, especially at low levels. However, I do find that when monsters start getting extra attack, because the rider only applies to their next attack, it does start to suffer quite a bit. And also, at that point, you're starting to get better disables and crowd control spells anyways. It's one that I usually use quite a bit at low levels and then just kind of leave aside as time goes on. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The whole reason we have better spells is so we can cast them, right? So Vicious Mockery at lower levels, great choice. Message. This is one that I like, but in practical table play, I usually find it quite redundant. If I need to talk to somebody, we can usually whisper, or we can, have some sort of sign, or, it seems like, I was going to say half the classes, that's not fair. But, there's probably a good 10 or 15% these days that have some kind of psychic communication with one another. And all those things has made message a lot less useful than it used to be. And depending on your table, you might just have permanent Rary's telepathic bond going at all times. Because I know a lot of tables I've played at, players just openly discuss anything they want, and that's fine. And then, okay, so in game, this is what we're going to say here, now that we've spent 20 minutes talking about it, So I don't think that's anything particularly bad either. But just be aware that if that's the way your table plays, then message is not going to be particularly useful for you. I would avoid Blade Ward. I do not think it's particularly good. Same with True Strike. I'm not a big fan of either one, to be honest. I know there's situations where they can be useful, but overall, I just do not like either one. Anyways, moving on to first level spells. Fairy Fire. This is one that I absolutely love. It's a nice way to expose invisible creatures potentially, but just giving all my allies and myself advantage on attacks is pretty good. It does have friendly fire, so that can be a bit of an issue. Beware of that. But overall, I think Fairy Fire is quite useful. Heroism. This is a really solid spell at lower levels. The temporary hit points is actually a really big boost in the early game, but it doesn't scale particularly well, and it just doesn't really keep up. It's one that I don't mind taking at lower levels, but I'll change it out for something else as we go. I don't really find I use it much past 4th or 5th level ever. But, you know, in the early game, it's pretty nice. Also, there's a lot of things these days that can do temporary hit points even better, like, say, Twilight Domain Clerics. So, you know, depending on your party composition, you might have no use for the spell, even from the early get-go. But, you know, like I said, in general, I find it's quite powerful at lower levels, but it has a sharp curve. Speaking of sharp curves and being great at low levels, Sleep, the ultimate in great low-level spells that just do not scale particularly well. Sleep is almost like an I win button at low levels. You know, no saving throw, you just put everything to sleep and you're good. However, because it scales quite slowly and monster hit points scale much quicker, it kind of loses its value quite early on too. But that's okay, you know, like I said, I'll take it at low levels and I'll trade it out for something else when I get to like level 4 or 5, whatever it is, right? Tasha's Hideous Laughter. This is a really great low-level disable spell. There's not a lot of other spells at this level that are pretty competitive, and it retains a fair amount of value, honestly. I do think we get better ones, especially for single-target ones, but, you know, it's still not a terrible choice. It's one that I find myself taking quite a bit, and I will often even just keep it because I'm like, well, maybe I just need something that I can, you know, use at low levels with a low-level spell slot. Healing Word. Even if I'm not going to be a healer, Healing Word is probably going to make it onto my list as a bard. It's just such a useful spell. It's so powerful for what it does. Cure Wounds is also a great spell, but if I'm planning on being like a healer, I might take both because Cure Wounds scales better. But if I'm not planning on playing a healer type or even doing like a lot of backup healing, I'm probably going to skip Cure Wounds entirely, but I'm still probably going to take Healing Word just in case. Cure Wound, see above, we've already mentioned that, no need to go into a lot of detail. Detect Magic. Do you have a limited number of spells? No one. I would prefer to let a wizard or somebody take it if possible. But it is a ritual spell, and I have ritual spell casting, so it's not a bad choice by any means. It's not like it's, you know, hurting the party. I like somebody to have it, and, you know, if nobody else does, then I guess that's going to be me. Ones that I see people take quite a bit are Thunder Wave and Longstrider. Thunder Wave isn't bad. I don't mind that spell. I feel like, in general, there's probably other spell choices I could have made at this level that I prefer, but I don't hate Thunder Wave. Longstrider, though, is one that I find to be very situational. It's not that it's a bad spell per se, it's just I find I just never have room for it. I don't think I've ever actually taken it on a bard, or pretty much on anybody for that matter. Maybe a wizard, just because I have so many spells eventually, but it's one that I almost never find myself using. And like I said, it's not that it's a bad spell for what it does. It's just, you know, it's the opportunity cost, right? Like, I could be taking something that's much better and will get a lot more use. So Longstrider is one that I just find I almost never take advantage of. But hey, maybe that's just my bad, right? Who knows? Anyways, moving on to second level spells. And we have a lot of spells here at second level, but unfortunately, tons of them are very circumstantial. And it's not that they're bad spells at all. It's just, you know, go back to my previous statement earlier about kind of knowing what role you want to fill. Like spells like knock, invisibility, etc. Those are all great spells, but I just might not be able to fit them in depending on how I'm trying to play my character. And that's just the honest truth. So anyways, one of my favorites though, or we'll start with a few of my favorites. Suggestion. This can be very, very powerful. Again, it is a little up to what your DM allows and up to your own personal creativity. But, telling a minion, like, help us kill your boss might not be an unreasonable suggestion, in my opinion. So, that's one that I like to use sometimes. Heat metal. I absolutely love this ability, this spell. The fact that there's, like, no saving throw and it's just damage every round and could potentially be inflicting disadvantage and causing people to, like, drop weapons and stuff. It's just a really potent ability that just never really stops being good, honestly. Now, granted, you are kind of limited in the targets you can choose because if they're not wearing or carrying something metal, it's not going to be useful at all. But, when it is useful, it's very useful. So, heat metal, great choice in my opinion. Blindness, deafness. This is one I mention a lot, and I think I sometimes give people the wrong impression. I really like blindness, deafness, but it is like never my number one go-to spell. The whole thing I like about blindness, deafness is the lack of concentration, which means that if I want to cast like a hypnotic pattern or a fear or something that's like, really good, I can do that round one. And then if something made it saving throw or broke out or whatever, I can cast blindness, deafness on it. And because it doesn't require concentration, there's no real interference there. But in my opinion, blindness, deafness is not as good as Hold Person, for example, which is the same second level spell. Both allow a saving throw. Blindness, deafness is targeting Constitution, which is generally worse, and it's a worse effect. The only reason I really like the spell is the lack of concentration, which gives me a nice spell for that second or third round of combat when I've already got something better in effect. And now I'm just like, oh, what else do I have? I need something that doesn't require concentration because I'm concentrating on better spell, right? And, blindness, deafness kind of fits that role, I find a lot. Anyways, enhance ability. This is just a nice buff with very flexible. Usually the fact that you're going to have to make some sort of check or whatever in advance gives you opportunities to use it. I like enhance ability quite a bit. Hold Person. All of these save or nothing type of spells, including blindness, deafness, of course, can be pretty risky. You're using a spell slot, you're using your action, and if they make their saving throw, then you did nothing but waste a spell slot and your turn. On the other hand, the rewards can be pretty big. So, Hold Person is a go big or go home type of spell in a lot of cases. I prefer it on someone like a sorcerer, where I can use heightened magic and give them disadvantage on the saving throw. That makes it a lot better in my opinion. But it's still not a bad choice on anybody who can take it. So, Hold Person, pretty good. Silence. It's a ritual, which is nice, although you're probably not going to have time to ritually cast it if you're in combat. This is kind of a nice way of shutting down enemy wizards especially, but it's very circumstantial. They can also move out of the area of effect a lot of times, depending on how your DM wants to play it. I've seen people where, they've been allowed to cast it on an item or something, so then if the person moves, they take the item with them, and the silence follows them. But I've had other DMs that say, no, you have to cast it on a specific location, and if somebody moves out of that location, it no longer has effect. In those cases, it's way less powerful, and arguably not worth taking in those cases. So like I say, it's pretty circumstantial, but when you're fighting the right type of enemy, it's quite excellent. It's even better on a bard because, well, not better on a bard, but you don't have counterspell on your spell list. Now, you could take counterspell as a magical secret, but by default, unlike, say, wizards, warlocks, and sorcerers, you do not have counterspell, and so having something to do against enemy casters can be pretty handy. Zone of Truth. This is another one that's kind of circumstantial. I like the spell quite a bit, but it might be hard to fit in. I think that things like Detect Thoughts kind of fall into the same category as well when we get there. So yeah, Zone of Truth. Aid. As of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Aid was added to the Bard spell list. It didn't used to be there, but now it is. It's a pretty nice second level spell. It's one I like quite a bit. I've talked about Aid before, but it's a buff spell that increases your hit points and not your temporary hit points. And that can kind of be a nice advantage because a lot of things will give you temporary hit points and Aid's not going to interfere with that at all. It also scales decently well. Although I don't know if I've ever cast it with like a really high level spell slot. I think I've used like 3rd level spell slots before, maybe even 4th on occasion, but even then, 4th is getting pretty pricey. That could have been a greater invisibility, for example. I mean, come on. Anyways, speaking of invisibility. Invisibility, the main reason I'm not super big on invisibility, because I do like the spell quite a bit, but greater invisibility is just 1,000 times better. And yes, it's 2 levels higher, but it's just so much better. There's also a lot of things that have like true sight or can detect or see invisible creatures as we get to like mid and high levels. So a lot of the spell's usefulness does start to taper off. But even still, it is just a good spell in general. It's very, very iconic D&D spell as well. So pretty hard to not put it on the list. Phantasmal Force. This is another one that results may vary depending on creativity and your DM. It's kind of like suggestion in that sense in some ways, or more like minor illusion, I guess. All the illusion spells kind of fall into this category, right? Same with major illusions, same with any of them, right? If your DM is willing to play ball and let you be creative and do cool stuff, then you'll get a lot more mileage than if your DM is like, no. Also, depending on the types of enemies, a lot of them can start seeing through invisibility as you level up to higher levels as well. Knock. Personally, I hate taking the knock spell, but if we don't have a rogue and we don't have anybody else who can do that kind of stuff, it can be pretty important sometimes. So I'd prefer that somebody else could fill that role entirely, but if they can't, knock can be kind of a lifesaver. Lesser Restoration kind of falls into this category for me as well. Again, I'd prefer not to have it. Hopefully, somebody else in the party can use it. But if they can't, it just cures too many things to not have somebody with it. So hopefully that person is not me, but it might be. And if so, then I'll take the spell, right? Pyrotechnics and Shatter, I figured I'd talk about both these together. I like both these spells. The problem is that there's just so many other spells on this list that I would prioritize over either one of them, I think. So it's not that they're bad, it's just hard to fit it all in. Something has to go, right? You don't have enough spells knowing to take everything on my list here. That said, bards do not have access to, say, like Fireball or any of the other traditionally great AoE spells that are available at like 3rd, 4th level especially. So, Shatter might be your best alternative to that. It is a pale imitation of Fireball, though. Let's just be clear with that. Fireball is much, much better. Anyways, moving on to 3rd level spells. And this is where we're going to end the video with our 3rd level spells. Then we'll do 4, 5, 6 in another video, and 7, 8, 9 will be like part 3, I guess, right? So 3rd level spells. Let's talk about one of my absolute favorites, Hypnotic Pattern. Yes, Hypnotic Pattern also has problems when you get to higher levels where a lot more things start being immune to the charm condition. That can be a bit of an issue, but Hypnotic Pattern is just an amazing spell. Great AoE, great debuff. There's no like saving throws after the first one, right? If they fail, they're just immobilized, It's just awesome. Fear, very similar effect in some way. Oh, not a similar effect, but a similar role to Hypnotic Pattern. I generally like Hypnotic Pattern better, but I like Fear a lot too. And, the cone effect can actually be really, really good if I'm planning on being on the front row anyway, right? So if I'm like a Swords Bard or a Valor Bard or someone like that, then Fear becomes a really nice choice because I might have been up close anyway, and I can hit a ton of things with this cone, and there's less concerns about friendly fire than, say, a Hypnotic Pattern. But it does suffer some of the same issues, which is that as we level up, a lot of stuff starts being immune to the fear condition. So, there is that. Bestow Curse. This is an interesting one. I do like the spell, but I almost never take it because honestly, Fear and Hypnotic Pattern are both better, generally speaking, right? Bestow Curse doesn't have some of the same drawbacks, though, with the Charm or Fear condition immunities. So I think that, there can be room for it, but honestly speaking, I almost never take it, even though I like it. Anyways, Leomund's Tiny Hut. Hopefully you have a wizard, and he took Leomund's Tiny Hut. But if he didn't, and if you don't have a wizard, the spell is just too good to pass up. Somebody should probably take it. You do have ritual spell casting, so it might as well be you if nobody else has it. Leomund's Tiny Hut is awesome. Never leave home without it. Plant Growth. Plant Growth is a pretty decent, battlefield control restriction, movement type spell. It's one that I like quite a bit. You don't tend to associate it with bards. I always think of it as one of my go-to choices for druids. And I tend to forget that it's even on the bard spell list. But every time I'm looking for third level spells for my bard, I'm like, oh yeah, Plant Growth is here. Do I take it over Hypnotic Pattern? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that I don't take it. It's still a great choice. Dispel Magic. We all knew I was going to have to mention this one sooner or later. Dispel Magic is awesome. It is overshadowed by Counterspell usually, which is just better normally, even though they are different, right? Dispel Magic is effects that are already in play. Counterspell is countering incoming things before they can hit you, But Dispel Magic is still awesome. And it's even better on a bard, as we all know, because Jack of all trades adds to the ability score checks. So, when it comes to dispelling magic, bards are pretty much the best at it, which makes it a pretty solid choice to take on a bard. Enemies Abound. This one isn't as good, in my opinion, as Fear or Leomund's Tiny Hut. Or Leomund's Tiny Hut, what am I saying? Well, Leomund's Tiny Hut is also awesome, but I meant to say Hypnotic Pattern. Jeez, still thinking about the hut. Anyways, but it does target intelligence, which is a very rare saving throw for creatures to actually be good at. And, that's not too bad. So, Enemies Abound, probably not my first choice, but definitely worth considering. And like I said, targets an interesting saving throw. Major Image, we've already talked about illusion spells. We won't go into a lot of depth there. You already know my thoughts on that. And Tongues. This is one that I probably wouldn't bother taking normally, but if I'm expected to be an actual face, maybe sometimes bards just end up being the party face by default almost, just because you have high charisma and you are probably good at persuasion, mostly because you're using it on the local lasses at the tavern. And I didn't plan to use it on the Orc King, but you might have to use it on him too. Hopefully not with the same results, though. But if I'm going to be the party face, I probably need to be able to talk to people, in which case Tongues is unfortunately kind of mandatory in that role. So, if I'm expected by my party to do that, Tongues is one I'm probably going to take. But if I think I can get away without it, I'm probably going to, go with the other choices on this list instead. Anyways, that basically sums up my choices for my favorite cantrips to third level bard spells. Like I said, I really enjoy bards. I think that a lot of times it's very easy to get caught in this idea of I'm going to take Burning Hands and Magic Missile, and then I'm going to take Scorching Ray, and level 3 I'm taking Fireball, and it's very easy to just default to all these damage type spells, which is fine, right? Damage is always going to be good. You win most fights by doing damage, so that's not a bad thing at all. But the fact that bards don't really have a lot of this to choose from, but are still full casters and are, incredibly good at casting spells, means that you often have to start digging a little deeper into the spell list, because you can't just rely on taking a bunch of different damage spells to carry you through. And personally, I really like that. I like a lot of these other types of spells anyways, so for me, it's not really a big deal. But I also find that for other people who maybe are used to taking a lot of damage spells because they don't know what else to take. And, look, especially if you're a newer player, nobody at your table is going to complain that you cast Fireball on somebody. They're always going to think that's a solid choice, right? Unless you, cast it on your own party members, of course, right? Or cast it on a red dragon. They might be like, what are you thinking? Obviously, it's going to be Unifier. But you know what I'm saying. In general, damage spells are always going to be a crowd pleaser. Nobody's going to really complain about them much, Whereas things like, Hypnotic Pattern, and then it turns out that, they're immune to Charm Condition, but your Fighter and your Barbarian weren't, and they got hit in the AoE, and now they're disabled, but the monsters aren't. Things like that can be a little intimidating for a newer player who doesn't really know necessarily what spells to choose and what the strengths or weaknesses of different ones are, which ones have friendly fire, which ones don't. And so, I find it helpful to be able to, have something you can look at to kind of go through and talk you through some of the choices and stuff. Anyways, as always, these are my opinions only. I'm sure there's probably some good spells I missed. I'm sure people will say that I'm overrating some or underrating others, and that's fine, right? These are just spells that I choose generally when I'm playing these classes. And for Bard, these are pretty solid lists. Also, remember, you don't have enough spell slots to choose them all as a Bard, so, pick the ones you think you're going to get the most mileage out of and just roll with it. Anyways, like I said, we're going to have Bard's 4th, 5th, and 6th level spells in my next video probably, and then 7, 8, and 9 will probably be its own video, although we'll see. I mean, as you level up, there's less spells on the list, and so it becomes a lot more of a narrow selection to choose from, right? So, who knows, maybe we can go 4 through 9 or whatever. We'll see how it goes. Anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I love reading everybody's comments, even if I don't necessarily respond. I promise you, I read every one because my channel is still fairly small and it's easy for me to read the comments. So, all of them will get read. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.